Welcome back to episode 10, season 2 of the Learning Curve podcast with Edmonton Catholic Schools. We're thrilled to have you back or to welcome you for the first time today. Our spotlight in this episode is on Kimberley Clarke, an educator with Edmonton Catholic Schools. Kimberley will share her insights on creating a culture and routines for goal setting and feedback with grade 2 students in an online learning environment. Before we delve into the captivating content ahead, let us take a moment for prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, grant us your wisdom and guidance. May our words resonate with educators, inspiring classrooms filled with empathy and understanding. Bless us with patience and resilience as we navigate the journey of creating positive learning environments. In the spirit of growth and learning, we offer this prayer. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. With respect, we acknowledge that we are recording today on the traditional land of Treaty 6, the ancestral territory of the Indigenous peoples. We pay tribute to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4, and the enduring contributions of Indigenous communities. With gratitude, we honor their wisdom and resilience. As a united community, let's engage with the diverse peoples who call this land home. May our interactions be guided by positivity, celebrating the richness of Indigenous cultures, and working towards reconciliation through respect, empathy, and collaboration. May our journey be marked by humility, compassion, and a shared commitment to truth and understanding. Now let's dive into the agenda for today's episode. First, in Jen's Learning Lab, she will explore the fascinating topic of goal setting to elevate student performance and engagement. Our main guest, Kimberley Clarke, sheds light on creating a culture of routines for goal setting and feedback with grade 2 students in an online learning environment. And lastly, Allison guides us through the segment Lit Literature, featuring the article Lesson Planning for Universal Design for Learning by Leanne Young. That's all for today. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Learning Lab, where we decode the brain's secrets of learning. I'm your host, Jennifer Espejo-Harrisimiak, here to take you on a synaptic saunter as we explore the realm of neuroscience and goal setting. Every teacher knows the struggle, that group of students seemingly immune to the motivation bug. Whether it's a fleeting disinterest or a lingering long-term funk, our attempts to jazz up lessons often fall short. It's time for a paradigm shift. It's not just about glitzy lesson additions, it's about leveraging the interplay between motivation and engagement in our students' brains. Enter that game changer, goal setting. Let's think back to our exploration of the brain networks and reconnect with all of that as we delve into how goal setting taps into cognitive and motivational processes, becoming a catalyst for enhanced learning. First in the lineup is the recognition network. Remember that one? The brain's information hub. Here, goal setting provides learners with a clear purpose. Setting specific goals focuses students on essential information, acting like a spotlight that illuminates relevant details, aiding in making connections and identifying patterns in the learning journey. Next, let's journey into the affective network, the emotional epicenter of learning. This is where goal setting truly shines. Aligning goals with students' interests is like a motivational injection. Achieving these goals becomes a thrilling ride on the positive emotional roller coaster. By granting students autonomy through goal setting, we pave the way for a learning environment full of ownership and self-driven enthusiasm. Last but not least, our strategic network, the mastermind behind the how of learning. Think planning, organization, and execution. Goal setting intertwines with the strategic network, urging students to plan and organize. With specific, measurable, and time-bound goals, students strategize ways to reach their targets. The strategic network steps up as students work towards their goals, overseeing progress, adjusting strategies, and nurturing metacognition and self-regulation. In essence, when we integrate meaningful goal setting into our teaching, we unlock the brain's motivation and engagement and epicenters. Let me leave you with a final point to ponder until our next episode. How could you weave goal setting into your teaching toolkit to create a learning experience that's not just richer, but downright engaging for your students? Let us know in the comments.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are right now. My name is Allison Gabucci, and I am one of the assessment and reporting consultants with Edmonton Catholic School Division. And today we have Kimberley Clarke with Genesis Online joining us today. Kim, you do grade 2?
I do grade 2 online. It's a thing. Yeah. It's funny how there's so many people still in our district who don't know that we actually have an exclusively online program. So
yes.
Yeah.
And that is 1 to 9 this year.
It is 1 to 9 this year. Yeah.
Okay, before we get started, briefly tell us, how did you get into teaching?
I think I've always sort of been a teacher. When I was little, I used to love looking at things and investigating, and then gathering the little people on my block around and be like, hey, look at this spider while I pull its legs off or something interesting. So yeah, no, I've really liked it. From the start, I wanted to work with Edmonton Catholic because I'm a Catholic, and I think that was important for me to stay within that sort of public education, but with a Catholic perspective. Mm-hmm. So this was the only district I applied to, and I've been working here for, this is almost my 20th year.
Wow.
Almost, yeah.
Well, thank goodness we have you, because I know you were doing amazing things.
Thanks.
Especially with your online grade 2 classroom. And we're going to dive into it. We're going to talk specifically how you achieve feedback and set goals with your grade 2 students. Mm-hmm. Again, online with grade 2s. It's remarkable.
It is it's a unique niche, if you would, mm-hmm. but it can be used all across the, it doesn't matter what modality you use. What I use on my online platform can be used in person as well. Mm-hmm. I have really high expectations for my students, regardless of their age. So even though they may be 6 or 7 years old, on the second day of school, I taught my students how to do a forced split screen on their computer so that they could work with 2 different screens.
Wow.
As long as you start with very small sort of baby steps and really repeat, and then you release that control, they have so much more freedom and more confidence in themselves. And you can do that in person classrooms as well as online classrooms. So yeah, grade 2 online can seem fairly scary to people, but the beauty of that age is that they love to learn and they love to listen when it's interesting. Mm-hmm. So even though it's online, which can totally seem scary, it actually turns out to be a really beautiful experience.
Look at that, giving ownership to students over their learning. So let's dive into feedback. So I know you are a big advocate for timely feedback for your students. Can you provide examples of how you provide this feedback to your students in your class?
Okay, so a very typical lesson in my room would run something along the lines of, here's our learning goal. We go directly to the program of studies. I even show that on my screen, like that's part of my shared screen piece. They see in there what we're supposed to be learning and what their goal or their expectations are supposed to be. From there, they think about, and we co-create the expectation for the class. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of those classes, we give immediate feedback for that overall goal, but then also through the baby steps along the way. That's the beginning of the year. We do it all the time throughout the year, but that's how we start. We always look back to the program of studies. We create that goal for the day and the I can statements, which my kids have become very good at. I don't create them. I let them create them. But of course, at the beginning of the year, that doesn't always look very organic, if you would. Yeah. So there's a lot of, let me show you how to do this. This is how it's supposed to look at the end. What could we say along the way in order to create that? So as the April videos would show, they can now they can articulate their I can statement fairly accurately. Mm-hmm. And if they need a little bit of tweak with that, they also now have a peer who has been working and training towards learning how to do that, who can give them immediate feedback on that I can statement too.
Wow.
But when you're talking about feedback, like for an immediate lesson, let's just say, so in the online environment, super, super easy. In person, maybe I would walk around with like one of those little markers with a little check mark or a little happy face or something on it.
Yeah.
But that was fairly typical for grade 2 when I taught in person. So I thought, how can I do this online? So what I did was when the kids open up their slides that they're working on after our lesson, I have the transparent check marks. And so as they're working, I give them a check mark or two, and they might even still be on that slide. And then they see this check mark show up on their end.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, that, like, or I give them a circle over the ones that they need to fix. So they get really excited to continue their work, complete their work. So not only is it giving them feedback on their lesson, but it also gives them feedback on and sort of that encouragement to keep going, especially with those kids who become, bored halfway through their practice or things like that. So just giving them that immediate feedback right away, that seems to be effective. And then if I notice that, let's say 3 or 4 or even one, it could just be one, who've kind of missed the mark on a section or an area or this whole entire group of slides, then we would pull those kids into a little breakout room, or if you were in person, you take them to the little table off to the side, or maybe you group them all together on the table they're currently at. And you just do like a quick little mini lesson right there. Ask them if they can repeat back to them, like to myself or to a peer. That peer teaching really, really helps. If they can repeat back to a peer what they've just covered again, and then we release again, see how they do. And if they're doing all right, then we're good to go. If not, then again, reteach or find a new way of approaching it. So
2 things stood out for me. One, you always need to start with teacher clarity, or just clarity.
Yeah.
Where students need to know what the learning goal is and what the success criteria is, so that they understand what they should be able to do, say, and understand by the end of that learning goal. Like, we need to start
for
there.
Sure. And it's totally modeled right from the beginning. It doesn't start off with them creating that. That starts off with sort of, I will show you how to do it. And then we can, then we do it together. And then then they can start doing it more on their own with a little bit of adjustments. And then they're on their own by April for sure.
Wow. Yeah. And then the second thing I notice is, I feel like you really build in routine, and you have to build in routine for this.
You got to be patient. Routine takes a long time. If you rush it, you've wrecked it.
If you rush it, you wreck it.
Yeah.
I love that.
We spend the whole month of September learning routine. Like, I know some people, they're ready to go. And it's not that I don't teach curriculum until October. That's not the case at all.
Yeah.
I use curriculum to teach the routines. But
chef's kiss.
But we do it at a very slow pace. So sometimes those pacing guides can be a little bit overwhelming at the beginning, because there's a lot that happens sometimes in September. But that's okay, because once you start getting yourself going and there is a bit more to it, then those pieces start to fall in place. And so that you start catching up a little bit on where you were behind. But there are some classes that will take much longer, and there are some classes that you could be, ready to rock and roll, or they had someone who runs a similar class to yours the year before, or, they had I can statements before, they understand that kind of stuff before. Then that is a beauty. That's the ultimate goal, is to get a class that came from someone or something like that. That would be fantastic. But yeah.
So it sounds like you're doing peer feedback as well as teacher feedback.
Yeah, it starts off with teacher for sure. The teacher models the feedback, and then I encourage students to look to how they can improve someone else in the class, because it's always easier to look exteriorly when you're looking to improve. So, for example, if we did reading. Okay. So I'm going to sit down, I'm going to listen to your fluency, and we're partners. Okay? So you're going to read a piece to me. I will give you feedback, and then you would read a piece. I would read a piece to you, and you would give me feedback. Now, quite often with littles, it's very superficial. Like, oh, I really like your voice,
And I was just going to ask you, how do we steer away from that superficial? Because that's all I'm thinking. Grade 2, they're going to be like, oh, you read well. Or like you said, oh, I like your voice. So how do you get that constructive and effective feedback from a grade 2 student?
So at the beginning of the year, I have to come in elbow to elbow and I'm listening, and then they give their feedback, and then I give feedback on their feedback. I said, that's a very nice thing for you to say, and how kind of you. But did you hear her run over some punctuation? Oh yeah, I heard that. Okay, let's think. How could we tell her that, she needs to stop to read those punctuation pieces properly? Or how do we ask her to repeat, or things like that? So then we're having this conversation, which this person is also privy to, but everybody understands that this is what we're learning. We're learning how to give feedback. Of course, we're learning how to read too.
Yeah.
But we're learning how to give effective feedback and how to take that feedback. And a lot of that comes from, they have to, this is that whole don't rush it or you'll wreck it. You have to build community in the class. They have to understand that when someone says something as a feedback piece, it is not meant internal, personal, right? So we don't say, oh, I love your heart. No, we're talking about a skill that can always be improved on. So even if you brought it right back to like phys ed or something that they do physically. So you don't say, I like the way you kick a ball. You say that ball went very straight. We were specific. We were talking about only the ball, not about that person. So things like that. So if they're really struggling with taking things personally, you have to take it outside of their body. So something more like physical education, and then they learn the feedback. And then I take myself out of that equation. Then they practice that again.
So the feedback has to be actionable.
And immediately actionable.
Yeah.
So now that I've told you that you've run over your punctuation, give me another couple of sentences. So they always get a chance immediately to fix from the feedback that they've just heard, either from myself or from someone else. Like, we don't at the end of the lesson give feedback. I mean, we do, but that's not the best spot for feedback. The best spot for feedback is right in the mix of it.
Yes.
And then they get that chance. And then as soon as they do that correction, then the class is encouraged to also give. So we have on the video, we talk about there is corrective feedback, and then there is celebration feedback.
Okay.
So it's like, wow, you really did. Last time we talked about you using special voices, and I really heard that in your intonation this time. Or last time we talked about, or just now I spoke about the punctuation, and you've really made an improvement. I'm really proud of you. So things like that are also part of feedback too. So not just like in the learning, but then being able to celebrate as well.
Fabulous. I have a question, and I feel like it might come up with teachers. How do you tailor your feedback to the differing needs in your classroom? How do you meet students where they're at?
Oh, that's a really great question. And like I said, if you're in the immediate and you're elbow to elbow, you can give feedback knowing where that kid is at that moment. But that might just be like a Polaroid, and you don't necessarily want a Polaroid moment for feedback. It might need to be a more global piece. So one of the video pieces that I had sent in was of a little one who's got quite a bit higher reading level. Actually, funny enough, both of the girls had a fairly high reading level, but one of her personal goals was to read vocabulary better. So she was missing the mark on her own personal feedback as well as her partner was. So and this was April, so I'm hop in and I say, okay, we're going to talk about vocabulary again. And how are you, that's the word you asked me how to say it.
Yeah.
Now that you've read the text, because I let you read the text piece through, do you know what that word means? And she said, no. And I said, okay, well, here's one of the strategies that you could use, because at the moment she had forgotten, and that's okay, right? So she goes back and she rereads it, and then the two of them discuss what they think that's worth. I leave that feedback with her and her partner, and then I actually leave them. I said, okay, partner B, this is now your responsibility. You've heard the feedback. You're going to give her the chance to read it again. And then you're going to you're going to talk to her about it again. You're going to have more of a conversation. And I leave them with, for them, that is independence and trust. It's huge for kids. Even if they miss the mark by a little bit, that's okay. But if you take yourself out, give them that independence and that trust that, yep, you know what you're doing. It's okay. Then they really take that learning in on themselves. And then they're like, oh, and then they tend to set higher goals for themselves than what I would ever have set. And I have high expectations, but some of my kids, they come out with goals. I'm like, some of them, you even have to take them down a notch. Like, okay, this is a great goal, but we're going to have to make this more attainable at the moment because we don't have 3 years. We have 2 months, right? Yeah. So sometimes like they take on that learning so much more when it's their set, and they believe that they can because they know you believe they can.
And what a great example for students to experience ownership and responsibility over their learning.
Yeah. And that's where the whole, like, how do you differentiate? I don't differentiate strictly on, let's say, skill, if you would, because then I feel like we aren't doing anyone justice. So I may have a high expectation. They might have a higher expectation. So I meet them in the middle, knowing where they can go. And depending on what their goal is, they may or may not require scaffolding. Right. And that's where the differentiation comes to. It's not the goal. It's the scaffolding to get to that goal that they want. Yeah. And so the feedback is, let's get to the next piece. Let's get to the next piece. Let's get to the next piece. Because it's a marathon, right?
It's a marathon and not a sprint. I love it. So you mentioned goals. Talk to me about how you use the feedback or how students incorporate that feedback to developing goals. Like, how does that look like in grade 2 for goal setting?
At the beginning of the year, it's about me setting the goals, the teacher sort of setting the goals. And although, depending on the group, if they had come from a teacher, like I had said, who had done goal setting before, lots of them will have great ideas. And then those ideas spring load off of others, right? There's no bad ideas. They're just maybe a little more complicated, a little more difficult to attain, but there's no bad ideas for these. So the most important part for me for goals is don't just set the goal. And don't just set the goal and have a timeline, because all that's lovely. The point is that you have to come back to the goal. So in our reading goals, for example, every 6 weeks, so we set a reading goal. This is our time period that we have, and it's in the videos too. But they then at the end of that, they have peer review. So they get to practice. Here's my goal. This is what I said I was going to do. Then you listen to me read. How did I do on the goal? And lots of times it's complimentary feedback, which is great. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is really great, and we try to remember to say, instead of but, we say and.
Okay. Yes. Right? I've heard this before.
Yeah. So if the but makes it sound like there's something wrong.
Yes.
And the and just adds on. So it's like, this is really great. And I'd like to see this, which is still the corrective part of the feedback. But when you take the but out, then it doesn't sound so negative, doesn't feel very negative.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing for littles. It's a hard thing for adults, but it's really hard for littles because that's what they're so used to hearing.
Yes.
And they're not great at changing their vocabulary in the middle, but they are now. By the time you come to the end of the year or closer to the end of the year, they get really good at the and part. So when we look at our reading goal, now we've had a chance to practice. I really like this. This is doing great. Then we all come back together and we thumbs up, or I need to work, or then they rework their learning goal. They look at their goal and they're like, okay, I was successful here. So now I get to make a new goal. I was partially successful. Let me adjust the current goal I have, or I really need to work on this goal. I need to have some more strategies. And those strategies, sometimes they can ask their reading partner. Sometimes they might find someone else in the class who had that reading goal before, because we discuss the reading goals all the time. So they might find, person B over there had that same, what did you use for strategies? And we use those words. We literally use reading goals, or goals, strategies, feedback.
Wow.
We use those words effectively, or
it's intentionally built into your teaching in your class.
It's used effectively in the last half of the year.
Yeah.
The first half of the year, it's like there's a lot of putting it into their vocabulary, using it without harm. So we don't, I want them to use the word feedback, I don't want them to be afraid of the word. So by the time Christmas comes, we have kids who say, can I get some feedback on this?
They're asking.
They're asking for it. the one little girl who's actually featured in this, that shows her like, I did this. She asks for feedback regularly. I'd like to get some feedback on this. Can we go into a breakout room? I'm like, who would you like to take with you? And then she names somebody in the class that she would like to take, because either they're effective together or that person has already been successful, or whatever her own personal, she just wants feedback. There you go. It's also a way to build socialization in an online environment, because they don't get to interact with one-on-ones. But like if we were in person, they would just go to like the feedback corner, for example, in your room or whatever. And it might even be like a little microphone like this, pretend, set up. And you'd be like, so I would like to get some feedback on. And then they ask. They love it. They think it's, at first they find it a little funny and a little weird, but we start off with things that are not so stressful. So can I get some feedback on my shoes?
Oh, right? I love that.
Do they squeak too much in the hallway? Like things like that, things that aren't so personal. And then they learn to use that word and ask for that more and more as we go along. So once we're done with that whole feedback, then they go back and they look at their goal. They change their goal, or, make a new one. And then from there, then we set the next 6 weeks. And then they meet with different people throughout those 6 weeks, or they meet with me. And then what's the learning goal you've got for this reading? Like, this is just as a reading example, right? Yeah. I mean, we use it in science, we use it in social. There's quite a bit in science where we're like, let's talk about the labeling of our diagrams, shall we? So like most of them can draw, but they don't necessarily label, or they forget those pieces. So then we put that into like a little feedback checklist even, so that they have to have a look at that while they're interviewing each other, or while I'm talking to them. I'm like, did you look at your feedback checklist? How are all those things? So that's the self-assessment. Did I meet all these outcomes? And they get to check off those pieces. Like, did I meet these I can statements? When we went back to the beginning and looked at the program of studies, they decided those things that they wanted to see. Yeah. Sometimes I have to input a few because they forget. That's okay. Right? But of course, that never looks like that at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, it's all very teacher-led, teacher-driven. And then they slowly get a little bit more control. And then after Christmas, usually I have to take it back again. I have to take the control back a little bit. Yeah. Because they forget, and that's okay. And then by the time April comes, I feel like I could just drink coffee and watch it all play out. Yeah.
I think that's so important that we as teachers, it's okay to have to control it in the beginning. We have to control it in the beginning. And we have to, in order for students to see that model and see how it works, it takes time.
Well, it does take time, but it is also super important for us to relinquish that control as well and let them take it. That independence is super important. Once they start to really feel like they're in control of their learning, it becomes easier, quicker, more meaningful.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you set your goals and you come back to it in 6 weeks or whatever the time frame is
for whatever goal that is.
And I think as teachers, we're so used to being like, okay, let's set goals, but then we don't intentionally come back to it and reflect on it. And that is the part that is groundbreaking for student growth and learning.
For sure.
We need to come back to it.
Well, for a few reasons. I mean, obviously, otherwise it just feels like it's just one more thing that we're doing. Yeah. But it's also to celebrate the growth, because sometimes we forget, and even they forget, the students that is, that we set this goal and now we can celebrate because we've completed this goal. Like being able to do that without a grade or a completion sticker or any of that sort of stuff, where it starts to adjust their internal motivation, if it would, right? Where they, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Where they want to do it because they feel successful. I don't know about you, but the last time somebody told me I had to do something, was not super successful at it. But if I decided I needed to do it, I was much more successful. So we were talking earlier about how we would give feedback to someone else because it's easier to give feedback to someone else. That is so true, right? That you can give feedback to someone else, but to give feedback to yourself, because we tend to be harder on ourselves, that's the end goal. So even though like in April, they're really good at giving feedback to each other, the point is to be able to give feedback to themselves by the end of the year. So then those last few months are, okay, so pretend you were giving feedback to so-and-so, but now you're going to give it to yourself. And then, because I want them to be kind to themselves. Quite often it's like, oh, they start off the year with like, I can't, I don't know how, or they use other words that I don't enjoy students using, like I'm stupid, I'm dumb. I don't like those words at all. So we don't start off with that. We start off with giving each other, because people want to be kind to others. So if you're kind to your friend, you need to be kind to yourself now too. So when you're thinking about, okay, you weren't successful on this particular piece, what would a friend say to you? Now that's what you need to be saying to yourself. So you need to be giving yourself effective and productive feedback, not destructive feedback. And so they, like, over the course of the whole year, like, so it starts off not looking pretty, but by the end of the year, they're giving themselves better feedback. And some I have the hiccup there. Some still need a little bit more help with either a buddy or with myself to get to that point. But the whole goal, the end goal, is to be able to give themselves feedback that's effective, so that they take it all, they're learning on themselves, they take their goals on themselves, they take their I can statements and their.
Okay, so just as we're talking here, I just want to quickly recap. You're starting with clarity, your learning goals, your success criteria. You at some point in the year, you're building student independence and ownership, and you guys are co-creating that success criteria together. So everybody is in on what the goal is and what they need to do to achieve that goal. And from there, just looking at that success criteria and going through the feedback process, whether it's with a peer, whether it's with you, they're able to take a look at that success criteria and decide, I either can do this or I cannot do this. And then based off of, maybe the goals that or the I can statements that they haven't been able to do yet, that is where they're building in their goal.
Yes.
And so you had talked about at the beginning of the year, when students are learning about setting goals, you try and steer them away, because it's like you were saying, it's hard to give ourselves feedback. We're harder on ourselves. And you had mentioned that you take the terminology I can't away from students.
Right out of the vocabulary. Yep.
So you are transforming or helping these students go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset.
Yeah. Right off the bat, right? Some of the very first lessons of the year, I should say, are growth mindset lessons. And then we revisit those books often and throughout the year, but it's quite a bit in September. That whole being able to accept feedback and not take it personally is really important. And that all comes from that growth mindset. So it's really where you need to sort of focus your time at the beginning of the year, because they come in with I can't, I won't, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, those words that were not allowed in class. We actually call them swear words. The word easy, funny enough, quick sidebar, the word easy is a 4-letter word in my class, and they all say, like, they all know that that's a 4-letter swear word. The reason we don't use the word easy, this is so easy, because it's not always easy for someone. So maybe this math is easy for you, or this language arts part is easy for you, but it might not be easy for others. And the way that I frame that is that is walking easy for you? It absolutely is. But here's our friend in class who has a walker or a wheelchair or is different able-bodied. And so walking for them is not easy. And even when you started off learning how to walk, you fell a lot. And so at the beginning of our school year, we are going to fall a lot in goal setting, in feedback, in lessons, in kicking a ball even. We're going to fall a lot. But in the end, we will all learn to move our bodies better, move our brains better. So at the beginning, it will always look like it's okay to make mistakes. I want you to make mistakes. That's the only way that we learn, is through mistakes. If you never make a mistake, you didn't learn anything. You already knew it, but you didn't learn a thing. I want you to learn a lot in grade 2. So I want you to make a lot of mistakes. And when they hear that, they're like, oh, because for them, mistakes are a bad thing. Oh no, I made a mistake. Oh no. And so we have to really reframe our thinking and go back and reframe what we say. So we've got mantras that we start in the beginning of the year where we get them to say things that we want them to believe in themselves. Like, I can make mistakes. I should make mistakes. Because they never want to say I should make mistakes. So we start off slow. I can make mistakes.
Yeah.
I should make mistakes is what they now say at the end of the year, because they're like, oh, that's when I learn. It's when I make a mistake.
Wow.
Or they're so proud of their mistake. Look at the mistake I made. Fantastic. When they can start saying things like that, like, look at the mistake I made. It's so great. And you celebrate those mistakes. That's when they take ownership of the learning, right? So we really have to reframe and use that growth mindset right from the get-go.
It just sounds like such an inclusive and supportive classroom environment where everybody has the understanding that we're all at different places and that is okay.
Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the year, it's okay that we're at different places. And I'm going to ask you for feedback because you're in a different place than I am. And I want your feedback. So it gets there. It gets there. But it's a very slow process.
Wow. Wow.
So
you have done some remarkable things and I know there are some teachers out there who are like astounded with grade 2 students. If we can do this with grade 2 students, we can do this with our whole student population.
You have to believe that they can do it, though.
You have to believe.
Because if you don't believe it, they won't buy it. They're not buying anything you're selling if you don't believe it.
Mic drop, Kim. Wow. So as I don't even know how to follow up with that, but as we kind of wrap up this conversation, what's your advice for teachers who are just embarking on maybe feedback, self-assessment, goal setting?
Oh, the whole kit and caboodle.
The whole kit and caboodle.
Well, the signature at the end of my email has been the same way my entire teaching career. And it's really what I live by. And it's the only way that you can get, for me, the only way that I think I can get complete buy-in from kids. And it's part of a saying, and I've made some adjustments, but it's famous and most people know it. It's they will, in years from now, students will not remember what you taught them, but they will remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. So if you can love them genuinely, they will do for you what they need to do to grow.
Wow.
But you need to love them. You need to be there for them. Yeah. You need to do those things. So I guess that's my advice.
Yeah.
It's like they will not remember that you taught them. Maybe they'll remember that you were the music teacher because they always love the music teacher.
Yeah.
But they won't remember if you taught them grade 2, grade 6, math, art. They won't remember any of that, but they will certainly remember how you made them feel.
Okay, I have one more big question for you.
Sure.
If you had a dream for education, what would it be?
If I had a dream for education. Wow. Okay, so that everybody gets what they need when they need it. That would be not just students. That would be teachers too. Administration too. That everybody gets what they need when they need it. Not 6 months later, not 2 years later when they need it. That would be a dream for me. Whatever it is that they need.
Kimberley Clarke, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about feedback. We are so excited to see what you're doing and going to achieve for next year.
Thanks, Allison. It's been great catching up with you again. I've missed you.
I missed you too, Kim. We'll talk soon.
All right, thanks.
Lesson planning for universal design for learning. Leanne Young is back, and in her insightful 6-page article, Lesson Planning with Universal Design for Learning, she brings to the forefront the transformative power of universal design for learning, referred to as UDL, in shaping inclusive and effective assessments. This article is for teachers seeking to create classrooms that cater to the diverse strengths and areas of growth of every learner. In the article, Young navigates through the 3 key UDL principles: multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of action and expression.
By emphasizing the importance of providing various pathways for students to access, engage with, and demonstrate their understanding of content, Young equips teachers with a comprehensive framework for creating universally designed assessments. Young is able to take the complex ideas of UDL and make it digestible by providing concrete strategies and examples that teachers can implement in their classrooms. Young's suggestions are both user-friendly and rooted in research-based best practices. With students bringing a wide range of background levels and experiences, the adoption of UDL becomes not just a pedagogical choice, but a necessity for effective teaching. UDL is not limited to a particular grade level or subject area. The principles and strategies are applicable across disciplines and educational stages, making this article a versatile reference for teachers in various contexts. This article is a great introductory place for teachers dedicated to fostering inclusive and effective learning environments to review how to create lessons that are accessible, engaging, and meaningful for all students.
As we conclude today's agenda, a heartfelt gratitude goes out to Kimberley Clarke for sharing her expertise. And to you, our dedicated listeners, stay connected with us on Instagram at ECSD Learning. And don't forget to subscribe for updates on future podcast episodes. We hope that today's episode sparks inspiration for meaningful connections with your students and encourages a thoughtful approach to assessment practices. As you continue your journey of growth, may you find fulfillment and impactful connections. From all of us here at the Learning Curve podcast, thank you for tuning in.